happy to bring this next guest on. It was one of my favorite hockey interviews that we've done. He's really a historian in the Detroit market. He was, as I mentioned before the break, he was in the glory days of the Detroit Free Press. He's written a lot of books that I'm sure if you're a hockey fan, you've read, because he's written the Grind Line and the Russian Five. But he wrote another book that we didn't get a chance to talk about the last time, A Miracle of Their Own, and I dove into it this weekend. I even watched the 1998 Olympics, Keith. I was able to pull that up on YouTube here, so I've even seen the game. But it's really a great book, as all the books are that Keith has written. But it's a landmark event too, because I was thinking about this in the terms of the All-Star game for the NBA this weekend, because you have the NBA that's a world game now, and I was at the 1992 Olympic trials in Oregon and saw that dream team live, and you'd see that time frame and you say, okay, they inspired a lot of these younger people internationally to get into the game, and because representation matters. They saw the U.S. on the world stage, they saw these other countries on the world stage, and that's kind of what's happened with this 1998 team, which I imagine was one of the reasons you were interested in them, because clearly with what we've seen as far as the development of women's hockey now, after they had their big victory in 1998 that inspired A Miracle of Their Own, now there's a lot of growth in the women's game, because all those young women saw the representation of, look at these American women and what they can do.
Well, Ryan, you're absolutely right. First of all, thanks for reading the book, getting the book and reading it. And with any luck, and this is a real moonshot again, but I have heard from not one but two different movie companies in Southern California who are interested in maybe doing a film about that 98 team, the monumental upset of Team Canada by Team USA for the very first Olympic gold medal. I'll tell you what, talking about representation, those girls who played on that team, they played with and against boys growing up, and they were often the best player on the ice with those boys. There were no girls teams then. Very, very, very few in Canada, but not very many. But what these girls, ages 7, 8, 9, 10, and beyond, what they had to go through to play the game that they loved, the sport of hockey, was absolutely crazy in the 80s and 90s. You'd think we'd have better opportunities for young women then, but we did not. And it wasn't until those women put together that team led by Cammie Granado, Karen Bai, Lisa Brown Miller from here in Michigan, Shelley Looney, who scored the golden goal from downriver Trenton. It wasn't until those women found a way to upset Canada, much the same way, Ryan, as the American college kids beating the Soviets in 1980 for their a real miracle, obviously. But the women had one, too, in 98, and it kind of got things going for a next generation of women. We see it now this week in the Olympics with the United States and Canada still the two dominant teams. They're on a collision course. They're going to play one another this week, and it's going to be much-watched TV.
Exactly. That's why this is such an important story to cover. I'm glad to hear that there's potentially a movie in the works, because obviously we know how well Miracle did as a movie.
Yes.
And this is equally as deserving of a movie, because you hit on one of the points that I wanted to talk to you about as far as what these women had to go through when they were young, because I'm sure people are thinking, well, okay, 80s and 90s, Title IX was in effect, but a lot of the programs hadn't really been given a lot of leeway and a good launch by that point, especially in something like hockey. And I talk about this a lot when I talk about professional hockey. I even talked about it with the issue regarding Gibson moving over to the Red Wings this year, because he had a little bit of a slow start. You still follow the Wings, but he's got to do, I tried to remind people, okay, not only is he starting NHL goalie, but he's trying to adjust everything else in his life. He's trying to move from his old team to his new one. So he's got to adjust not only on the ice but off. And that would have been a constant for these women, where they constantly had to adjust to, okay, how do we deal with locker room situations? How do we deal with equipment issues? How do we deal with the fact that we're getting constantly made fun of or poked fun at because we're women in quote unquote a men's sport? Sure.
You're absolutely right. And, these young women, girls growing up, even before puberty, during puberty, and so on, they want to play the game. They have to find a closet to dress in, or a restroom, or something like that. They're constantly body shamed by their own teammates. Sometimes, young boys are. They don't have much of a filter sometimes, and I can remember Sarah Teeding, the gold medal winning goaltender. She played high school hockey in Illinois, suburban Chicago. She played goaltender on the boys' team that won the state championship in Illinois. She was the goaltender. And the stuff that she had to put up with, the chanting, Sarah Teeding has a big 5-hole, and all kinds of other stuff that the adults and fans of other teams are chanting. That sounds ridiculous, some of it. But they persevered, obviously, and got a little bit lucky, got good at the right time, and took advantage of a really, really good Canadian team that they just had a bad day in Nagano, and the American women won it. And it's quite similar. I think that team, the women's team, and all the little girls. The growth in girls hockey just exploded in this country and Canada too, by the way. But it was kind of neat. But I always go back to the 1980 miracle game where the Americans beat the Soviets. When that 1980, guys like Mike Bonanno, Jeremy Roenick, Bill Guerin, that whole generation of boys were 8, 9, 10 years old, right? And they're the best athletes of their age groups when they're growing up, and they suddenly realized that it doesn't have to be football, basketball, or baseball. These young college guys went out and beat the mighty Soviets. Pretty good story. Kids started to get interested in hockey. All of a sudden, you got all those boys that I mentioned are in the Hall of Fame today in hockey that might have chosen baseball or football or basketball back then, but they chose hockey because of what happened in this country after the Miracle on Ice game.
Exactly. I mean, this is why I like concepts like this, because I was always interested growing up in books like The Tipping Point or Freakonomics, things that you analyze concepts, because it's easy. This is kind of analogous to my sports show as a whole, because I like to cover kind of the in-depth stuff like this, whereas a lot of people are just satisfied covering, okay, well, why did he drop the ball? They didn't convert on 4th and 7 or what have you. That's a little rudimentary to me. I like to go to the origin stories of a lot of this stuff. But for something like this, you have to go way back because, the seeds are sown a long time prior to a lot of this stuff. When you say, oh, well, why do we have such an international feel to basketball now? Or why is the women's hockey league, and both in college and the pros, why is that growing so robust? Well, you got to look back 20, 30 years and see what was happening then. And what was amazing to me is watching that YouTube broadcast, they were even talking about it on the broadcast. They basically were saying, hey, these women and these coaches know what they're playing for. Yeah, they're playing for the gold, but they're playing for something much larger because they're on the big stage. They even had the quote from Coach Ben Smith talking about how, hey, he wants to be, if he's golfing and he's golfing with Canada and he's standing on the green and they have to make a long putt, he wants them to make their putt and then he wants to make his putt on top of it so they can give the best stage for these women as a whole, and they did so.
Sure, you're right. But you mentioned 50 years after. 50 years has been. The book came out in the 50th year of Title IX. 50 years, right?
Right.
And the game is growing a lot of places, except maybe not here in Michigan. And that's a travesty, Ryan. That's a travesty. The state of Michigan has 7 Division I men's programs, hockey programs in the state. 7 of them: Michigan, Michigan State, Michigan Tech, and so on. There are 0 Division I women's hockey programs in the state of Michigan. 0. So if you have a daughter who's a pretty darn good hockey player and you want to watch her play college hockey someday, you might have to go to Columbus and watch her play at Ohio State or Penn State or Wisconsin or Minnesota or someplace, because Michigan, Michigan State, none of these other big programs that have men's programs have women's programs. That is outrageous.
It is, and I want to tell you, I did have this on my list. I was not going to get out of this interview without talking about it.
Thank you.
And because that was number one, and it's basically part of the epilogue of the book. You refer to it, and why? I know when we first started talking about this book, which was probably almost a year ago after your first appearance on the show, we were hoping that there would be a program in Michigan by then. Why do you think that hasn't happened yet?
Honestly, I don't know. It's not easy to start a program. It's not easy to start an expensive program. It's not easy when you have one sheet of ice at the University of Michigan at Yost Arena and the boys don't want to share it. That's the problem. They don't want to share it. But you can't tell me, you know better, you know sports, sports economics and so on. I mean, the University of Michigan prints money, period. When that university says, well, we'd like to add women's hockey, but it's awfully expensive, we're not sure we can afford it, I don't buy that for a second. Not for a second. If they wanted it, they had it 10 years ago. It's outrageous that we have to send our daughters out of state to play highly competitive hockey when they get out of high school here. It's just wrong. Why don't we have it? I don't know, but I think if Michigan, there's been a study sponsored by and paid for by, I think, the NHL even is involved in somehow. There's a study out there about bringing hockey to the University of Michigan and what it's going to cost, to get it off the ground and annually and so on. And that's being talked about now. There's been a change of presidency at the University of Michigan recently. The outgoing president was all in terms of a women's hockey program, and he's no longer around. I don't know where the new president stands. I know a couple of the regents are all for a women's program. One of them being Denise Illich, the daughter of Mike and Marion Illich of the Detroit Red Wings ownership. And I know that Denise is pushing really hard to get a program going. I don't know where they stand, but as soon as Michigan gets a program, Michigan State will, and then Northern, and then Michigan Tech, and Western Michigan, and Sault Ste. Marie, Lake Superior State, and so on. Get these women's programs so they could play. They have opponents to play nearby within the state, and then our daughters can stay home and play college hockey.
Exactly. And with all these tentacles that are out there, you would think that there would have been more momentum because, like you said, it is kind of a domino game at this point. If Michigan does it, then the rest of them are going to do it, but you need somebody to break that dam and let the water flow because you're talking about the Illich's daughter and the connections with the Red Wings. Obviously, we've got Hockey Town there. You know the history and have chronicled the history better than anyone from hockey in that city. And then you have all the great teams and rivalries at a college level here in Michigan. It's just kind of criminal that we don't have the women's side represented as the sport has grown so much elsewhere. Yep.
And it's taking moments like this, you and I talking about it, other people talking about it, and when we have to bump into somebody, a University of Michigan regent or the new president out there or whatever, or at any of our universities, why don't you have a women's hockey program? You want me to write a check for your foundation? You better get in the game and give our young women the same opportunities you give our young men in this state.
Exactly. And you hit on a great point as far as the economics of things. Universities have been crying poor for a while, and that's hitting deaf ears, I think, at this point, especially with everything going on in football and NIL and
well, you fire a football coach and he's got a $60 million payout, and you pay him, he walks away. Well, what does that tell the world? And we just had another one this week, and somebody just got fired. He's got $19 million left on his contract. They just pay him and let him walk away. So you're right. You're right, Ryan. Don't tell me you don't have any money, because you do.
Exactly. They've tried that for a while, and then we saw it here. Obviously we had the whole thing at University of Michigan and with the football program, but Michigan State's been dealing with this in succession, basically, and then you've got this all over the country. So there's a lot of leeway here, and there's got to be opportunities out there. But like you said, it takes some motivation. It takes conversations like this. So we're going to take a quick break and then return to the conversation here with Keith and talk about women's hockey and the progression of it, and maybe sneak in some wings too if we get a chance. But stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Keith Gave, having a great conversation with him. Keith, I have an aside here because my producer on Thursday, Dan, one of my regular producers, he was talking about how the combination between a background in intelligence and then going into sports must be unique to me. I said, no, there's an OG here, and I'm going to talk to him on Monday. So I wanted to make sure I said that before we got you on, but I said, it's a conversation between the only two with that background that I know of.
Yeah, and that's something. Who would have thought, eh? Who would have thought?
It's a surprisingly good combination, especially with this kind of subject matter. Like, I think this enables you to go deeper into subjects and obviously gather information, which is key when you're putting a book together or writing a piece. But it's the in-depth nature of our backgrounds combined with sports, I think is a good combination, because we're lacking that, especially nowadays.
Yes. The biggest difference now is, before we gathered all this intelligence, information intelligence, whatever you want to call it, and put it in a book, gave it to some guys with a even higher, deeper security clearance than we had, and move on to the next thing. And here in the news business, sports writing business, you gather information, you get all this stuff, you get the really, really good stuff, and then you can tell the whole world about it. That's the fun part. Is sharing it with people.
Exactly. That's the big difference, because you have to be okay with being anonymous, especially when you're in intelligence. That's a very anonymous business, as you know. But it's almost like sports writing is too anonymous in itself. That's why I have a lot of writers of any of the vocations in sports. I have the most writers, because I want to highlight, hey, you really liked that article, you really liked that book that you read. Well, read that byline for me to make sure you know who produced that.
Thank you for doing that. Yeah.
I think it's important because, we didn't used to be able to have a byline when we were in intelligence. There was no byline, maybe to certain people that were cleared, but otherwise it just got grouped in with everything else, and
that's right.
And like you said, went to the top. But no, it's always fun to talk with you about this stuff, especially on something like this, because it is an important subject matter, and I'll make sure to try to advocate for that movie, because I feel like that's another piece that could help these dominoes that we're trying to get to fall, because I'm actually working on something similar with former Lions quarterback Eric Kramer, who's become a friend of mine through the show. Great. And he has... Go ahead.
What's his claim to fame? Four touchdowns on Monday Night Football. How about that?
I know, and he's still. This is wild to me. This is on the Bears side of his career, but he had the season passing record for the Bears, even though they moved to 17 games. He had the season yardage passing record for the Bears up until this season, and he still holds the touchdown record for the Bears.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's the fact that it's held up that much when the passing game has really increased on the football football
Yep.
side of things, and now they have an extra game to do it. So he's holding up, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with his book and what happened after his career, but his career got, or his life got kind of upended after his career, and that's what the movie would kind of address, because he's trying to deal with some serious issues with conservatorship and how the courts handled his story. He's actually going to be doing the third part of an interview series I'm doing with him in a couple weeks on my Thursday show, because that's kind of the same thing. He's trying to get his movie out there to kind of give a voice for the voiceless, kind of like we're doing here.
Good for you, and good for him. I hope that happens, because I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know there's a good story there. There's a really good story there.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll be throwing this into the mix, though, because I'm glad you're in talks with folks about this potential movie, because not only would it provide a lot of entertainment, but it would almost cycle through another iteration of the representation that the 1998 group got, because that's kind of what happened with. I would venture to guess that's what happened with the actual Miracle movie, because a lot of folks I was born in 1983, that happened in 1980. Being a sports fan, I had learned about it after the fact, but that Miracle movie brought it back into the forefront, and that's what, if they do a Miracle of their own movie, that's what that could do. Yeah,
and of course, we didn't need a whole lot of a huge history lesson when you talk about the United States and Russia in 1980. The Cold War is still very cold. The two sides are both sides got their hand on the trigger on the big red button, and we lived in fear in the 60s and 70s and the 80s, and kind of cooled off a little bit, but those are tense, difficult times, and when you got a bunch of college kids playing a professional hockey team like the Soviets were in 1980, the best hockey team in the world, best program in the world, and they found a way to upset them, it was a big deal. And the reason I would encourage people to watch this week when the United States plays Canada, the two best teams in women's sports. This is I'm telling you, Ryan, this is the best rivalry in sports. The Canadian women against American women, they really, really don't like one another. I covered the entirety of the Wings Colorado Avalanche rivalry in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I know how badly those teams really, really didn't like one another. Canadian women, American women against one another this week is as good as rivalry gets in sports, and people need to sit down and watch this game, because it's going to be a lot of fun.
I agree, and in comparison with that Cold War rivalry that you're talking about in the 80s, that was kind of more of a snapshot in time on the men's side, because of multiple factors. Obviously, the U.S. men they've put a good team together, and they're rolling now, but they don't have the same. Obviously, it's not even the same construction of the countries at this point in time. But so that hasn't continued. But this has just added fuel to the fire. That was more of a one-off on the men's side, but the women's side, that was the turning of a page that led to a whole separate book of consequent rivalries, because we haven't even covered between 1998 and today.
Right, exactly.
So definitely worth watching. Now, we got to get you out of here soon, but I feel like I can't have an expert on the Red Wings and a former beat writer not actually ask him a question about the Red Wings here at the break. So I'm curious if I'm sure you've been following them some, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on the season.
I follow them very closely. I'm in touch with Scotty Bowman a fair amount, Jim Devillano a fair amount, Paul Woods, the radio analyst, Ken Cal. I talk to those guys all the time. So I'm not only watching what everybody else is watching, but I'm also talking to folks to get some behind-the-scenes information, because I'm interested. But I got to say, it's been fun to watch this team this year. A lot of difference between this year and other years. They're getting stops from a goaltender, right?
Exactly.
They're getting stops, and it's taken Steve Eisman a long time to get the goaltending thing figured out. and he's got it figured out at least temporarily right now with these two guys, Cam Talbot and John Gibson, and they're both playing pretty well. But Gibson's playing really well. Nobody could have expected that. And I think that another big difference is a whole season from start to now with Todd McClellan behind the bench. They didn't have the right coach the few years before that, and they have a coach with some credibility that players listen to, respond to. Maybe they're a little afraid of sometimes because he's not afraid to throw them under the bus when they deserve to be, which I don't mind at all. But the team is made up now mostly of NHL players, right? as opposed to maybe as many as a third of the players are AHL guys, American leaguers, and they have no real business trying to play a full season in the NHL. But that's how thin the cupboard was. The cupboard was almost bare in terms of prospects, developing players, and so on. Steve Yzerman, in my view, has done a really, really good job. It hasn't been fun being as patient as he asked us to be, has it? It's not been fun at all. I can understand why people are a little bit, frustrated. But I can't imagine anybody else coming in here and doing a better job than he's done since he's been here, since 2019.
And you hit on it, Keith. He had to restock the cupboards, and now not only does he have NHL players at the NHL level, shoot, he even had to send a couple down here to Grand Rapids, and now he's got a real good team rolling here in Grand Rapids, off to what was a historic start, basically in the history of the AHL. So
that's right.
The tide is rising, I think, for them in general. Like you said, that goalie situation, they right-sized that. They got a true 1A and 1B. They've got a lot of young goalies in the system to come up. Yep. And now we're seeing some young guys that are ahead of schedule. So I'm curious. I know they're in a hiatus and they're in the Olympic break, but I'm curious if he's going to add anything here, because I could see him adding a piece or two, because as the old saying goes, they played well enough to earn the ability to make a move at the break here.
I couldn't agree more. And frankly, I thought he should have done something at the break, at the deadline last year, because it's nothing. These things are often symbolic more than anything else. It's a way of the general manager saying, "I like what you're doing. Keep doing it. Here's a little bit of help for you." Right? Here's a little bit of help. Players they worked their butt off last year, and Dylan Larkin, spoke out. He was a little upset about it, that they didn't do anything at the deadline, and I couldn't blame him for that. A lot of people wanted to be upset at Dylan Larkin for that. Are you kidding me? He's a captain of the team for a reason. Let him talk. That's good. Let him get it out there. And Steve Yzerman wasn't shy when he was when he was a captain of this team. I covered him from the time he was 19 years old on. He wasn't afraid to speak up. Neither is Dylan Larkin, and I think Steve Yzerman respects that. I really think this year Yzerman will do something, and it's going to be more than symbolic. He's going to make a move or two, whether it's maybe it's somebody with a little bit of size, somebody with a little bit of belligerence, somebody that people don't like to play against so much. I think the wings get pushed around still too much. I'd like to see him upgrade their center position as a real number 2 center, although they're getting some good work from Kopp these days and so on. But they're thin in a couple of places. Another defenseman wouldn't hurt. But Steve Yzerman will be able to do this before the deadline, and Ryan, all they got to do is play 500 hockey the rest of the way. Win one, lose one, tie one. Win one, lose one, tie one the rest of the way. They're going to be in the playoffs.
Exactly, and they've been resilient so far this year. That was one of the improvements under the first full year of McClellan here, where they did have some nice win streaks, but they also accompanied them by some pretty long losing streaks too. So this year they don't get down for too long. That's one of my favorite lines that I've heard regarding what the Red Wings need. They need belligerence. I'm going to take that forward here, Keith, because that is true. They do need it. They can't have. I think I just saw a statistic that Finney is one of the leaders in hits on this team.
Yeah.
They need some.
Yeah.
They need some guys that are going to get in there and mix it up, kind of like the guys that you wrote about on the grind line. They need some of those guys.
Oh, by big time. If if they can get one guy like that, somebody who bumps into people like Kirk Maltby did, or instills the fear of God in them like Joe Kosher did and Darren McCarty did. They need somebody like that. Listen, Dylan Larkin's not a big guy. He's not small, but he's not all that big. But Larkin, Raymond, DeBrincat, Kane, these are all smaller guys. Their best guys are on the small side, and they're getting their butts kicked by people taking liberties with these guys, and nobody holds the other team accountable at all, and that's the thing that's going to hurt Detroit down the stretch in the playoffs. Is that if they got nobody, if they don't have anybody that guys don't respect, then it's going to be a short series. They're going to run out of their own building. They need some size and some belligerence, some truculence, as Brian Burke would say.
I completely agree, and that's. I know the enforcer role has kind of evolved a little bit over the years, and it's not as prominent, but it's still very useful. And I feel like it's especially apparent with Raymond. He always gets just. Run over out there.
Yep.
And I know Sider has tried to be in that role, but they need him to be in an adjacent role.
Right.
And so I agree with you. I think if they just add a couple bodies to mix things up, they're going to be well improved. They don't necessarily need a big name or a huge acquisition as far as asset wise. As far as what they have to give up, it's more about those enforcers. So great stuff, Keith. Really appreciate you joining the show and taking the time. Great stuff on the women's side of things, and then glad we got to cover the Wings a little bit. And I'd love to have you back on maybe later in the season. Hopefully, maybe after some movement on the women's side of things, and maybe to talk about an impending Red Wings playoff run here.
Oh, I would love that, Ryan. Let's do that. Okay, let's make it happen. I appreciate your having me, and. Good luck with your show and everything you got going on, man. Keep up the good work.
Thanks. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'm glad we can pair together intelligence guys in sports here. We've got to keep our brotherhood together. But
that's right.
But I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again soon here.
Thank you, Ryan. Take care, man.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Thanks, Keith. Thanks to Keith Gave. Great stuff from him. I would implore people to check out not only his book, A Miracle of Their Own, and all of his other books. If you haven't read those, especially as a Red Wings fan, listening to this segment, The Grind Line, and all of his other books. Russian 5 is one of my favorite books of all time, and definitely sports books of all time. Yes, maybe because my intelligence background combined with sports, which is what that book's about. But it's basically like a stranger than fiction type book that outlines how the Red Wings got the players from Russia. Keith was a key part of that whole operation. We talked about that in his last interview with his intelligence background. He was basically doing cloak and dagger operations for the Red Wings here. So interesting stuff. We'll look forward to having him back on. Appreciate him coming on.